Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you here today, and I'm going to introduce you to a bit of our work. But before I get started, I'd also like to introduce colleague Ella Fredrickson, who is been supporting us on this work. Ella, I don't know if you'd like just to say a hello and a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Ella. I've been working with Pilio for just over a year now. I'm based in New York and support Pilio on sustainable fashion, focused mainly in the UK. And I'm really happy to be here and talk with you all.
Great. Ella, would you like to share the slides?
Okay, hopefully everyone can see this.
It's not coming up yet, Ella. Oh, there it is. Great. Yeah, so and Ella, if you go to the next slide. So just to outline a little bit what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm just going to give a little bit more background about Pilio and who we are and the type of work that we do, especially focused on sustainable fashion. And then take you through some of those case studies, but then really highlight a new project that we've been working on at Looking, which I think is obviously relevant to this group, is about wool and the development of a sustainable wool fibers. Next, Ella. And so as the introduction said, is I come actually from a sustainability background and have been working in sustainability for about 20 years. And I met my co-founder, Russell Lavery, here pictured, when we were working together at Oxford University. And Russell and I teamed up together, and what quickly became apparent is that we were going beyond just a research R&D project. At that time, it was looking primarily at and how the UK could transition to defossilify the energy system. And so we became actually the first spin out from the Environmental Change Institute, and then have been supported by Climate Kick, which was a pan-European program, or is a pan-European program to support entrepreneurs. And over the last 10 years, we've been developing different tools and advisory services to support businesses transition into what now gets commonly called net zero. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, we've really been incorporating nature dimensions of our work. As I'll go on to share, a number of our clients are working in land use based commodities, and as they started thinking about how they would reduce their emissions, it quickly became apparent that they also needed to think about their land impacts, which I think is especially pertinent for thinking about sheep and livestock. Next. So some of the recent work that I've done, and I'm sure this report can get shared after, but I was invited to do a piece of work with the British Fashion Council that got launched just in Fashion Week in 2019, and it was co-authored with Dilys Williams, who some of you might be familiar, who is the head of the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. And the British Fashion Council really asked us to look at kind of where is the state of fashion and in its relationship to thinking about its environmental impacts. And this was a really nice piece of work to work on, because it looked at fashion in around and its significant both domestic impact in the UK, but global impact, and also the opportunity that the fashion industry has to reduce its impact. And especially the report was wanting to think about what small and medium-sized organizations could do, given that so many businesses within the fashion sector are actually small and medium-sized, and also the supply chain. Even the big brands, as everybody knows, you know, they work with hundreds, if not thousands, of small providers. So this report was really starting to unpick where these opportunities might be. Next. And then this led to a really interesting piece of work, which I've been the technical writer on for 3 such reports. So, and I think this is really interesting because this work has been supported by the UK. It's called UK Research and Innovation in Innovate UK, which is really it's the agency, the research councils that support all areas of scientific research and humanities research, but also Innovate UK is the kind of entrepreneur agency and is thinking about how to support and new and small businesses go to market with things that might improve society. And so we were asked to do 3 different reports. One was in New York, Paris, and India. And what it was really looking at is where are the opportunities for the UK in its being at the forefront and in leadership. What kind of one, I think the UK has been at the forefront of sustainable fashion, and how could the UK, both from research and from its businesses, really take advantage of that to develop more international collaborations and really leverage all the kind of opportunities that it has. So this report, and again, I can make sure that these resources are shared after this talk, but one, it really highlighted to me the great opportunities that UK businesses have for galvanizing sustainable fashion and being a critical player in this, and the work that's being done through this network is an example of that. Next. And then we've also, in fact, it was through one of these missions that I met Priya Alawalia, who some of you may have come across, but Priya is an incredible up-and-coming designer. She just won the British Fashion Award for her leadership in change, but she was also, has just been a finalist for the Woolmark Prize. And Priya kind of brings together her heritage from India and Nigeria and her kind of training in Britain and her kind of British outlook as well to really think about the role that fashion has in storytelling. And I think the wool story is very much an example of this, like how these textiles and material and their cultural root can tell story. And so we've been working with Priya to really, and one, she's been very kind of very strong principles around sustainability in her brand. And so we've been working with her to really ensure that that gets embedded into her practice and her new and up and coming partnerships. And as she builds new collaborations, like she's just done a collaboration with Paul Smith and she's done one with Gani. So as she builds her brands, how can she ensure that ethos stays? And that, as I think us on the call will appreciate, this can be quite challenging as you are responding to market demand and opportunity and having to move quite quickly. How do you ensure that sustainability remains into your thinking? And I think the interesting thing about what Priya has been doing is kind of taking recycled fibers and giving them new vision and new life. So pretty much all the material that she uses is second life material. And so her Woolmark Prize was using recycled wool to create her collection. And you can see her collection online. So it was a really kind of challenging collection for her because she hadn't worked as much with wool fibers, but she found it really exciting and gave it like a different, she learned a lot about wool fibers in doing the collection. But I think this is also exciting, is to bring designers and showcase and give them a chance to really experiment with wool and what it can provide as a kind of a material in its collection. Next. And so that kind of leads me onto what I really wanted to focus our session. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor about our work. And actually, just before I say that, I mean, we do a lot of carbon footprinting work with our clients. So we do a lot of helping them, you know, in Priya's case, helping her really understand the material environmental impacts of everything that she does, from within her fibers to putting on her collection and distributing that collection. And so then we're working with our companies to help them think about their opportunities for reducing. And then, as I said at the outset, like, this has also led us to really think about their impact on nature and the land. And I think, as you'll see as we go through these slides, I'm going to be kind of talking about what that might look like. And I think, you know, what I sort of titled this talk about is how do we build a sustainable supply chain in, you know, if we want sustainable wool, what does that really mean? And how do we evidence this? And I think this is making great transparency and ensuring that the consumer really understands what has been entailed in producing this product for them, and ensuring that the producer and the brand can really credibly tell that story. And I hope what you're going to see is kind of an illustration of how that might work and the tools that might support that. But I'm going to really hopefully bring this to life through a case study that Ella and I have been working on in Buckinghamshire. So this is a farm that has 3 rare breeds of sheep. So on the left is the Oxford Downs, in the centre is the grey-faced Dartmoor, and then on the right is Gotlands. And Gotlands I'm going to be particularly focusing in on because of the opportunity that a Gotland fleece has for textile making. So if you could go next, Ella. And so this is kind of thinking, you know, these are 2 samples of what a final product might be from Gotland wool. Gotland wool is a really beautiful, like, natural colored fiber, and gives it's got these charcoal gray colors, and it's a very kind of soft next of skin fleece. So, you know, it would be a nice textile to be using in knitwear. Next. And then, but then what we're finding is, and I think this is, you know, especially why this program has been developed, is that there is this kind of brokenness of the supply chain. And this is what we've also seen in the work that we've done with Priya and Alawalia, because even if you want to design a collection with this kind of sustainably sourced fiber, then it's hard to get the volumes through within the UK to be assured that you can have the quality and quantity that you need to produce that fiber. And so what's been really exciting, and why this group of people are, you know, there is this opportunity and a resurgence of how do we rebuild this supply chain. So innovative brands like Priya can actually confidently source these materials. So what Priya finds when she's trying to work in these innovative materials, she can't be confident that she can purchase, you know, get hold of sufficient stock to, she can design a collection for the runway, but can she assure that she's got enough of that material to meet an order? And I think this is what we're finding in the work that we're doing with these rare breeds of the Gotlands, is being confident that, one, there's the demand for using that wool, but also can we produce it efficiently into the supply chain. So that's kind of what we're trying to look at in this project, and we're trying to undertake this with kind of a sustainability principle underlying, so that we can really showcase the real environmental benefits that comes from using a wool fiber. And that's just some of the Gotland fleece there that's come from the farm that we're working in. Next. And so what we've done is thanks, Ella. So what this project has really been about is taking this case study farm, and we work with a whole network of farms actually more broadly. So the tool that I'm going to show you is being used for many more farms, but what we're trying to do is really showcase through this project what the potential and opportunity of using, for example, this rare breed, heritage breed wool fiber could be, and if we underpin it by the the science. And what we're, I guess, and what will be interesting when we come to the Q&A is that we've been thinking about both, you know, providing this fleece, this Scotland fleece, more to the artisan craft market and spinning community, as well as the brands. We're really interested in the commercial potential to fulfill a kind of orders through of not just the Gotland fleeces at the farm that we're working in, but within the wider Gotland livestock community in the UK. Go next, Ella. And so I think what really underpins and is really important about this is, and why we're like so passionate about it, you know, having worked a lot in sustainable fashion and working with companies that are now committed, you know, they're declaring their climate emergency, they're declaring an ecological emergency, but now they need to really tell the story of how they're doing it. How is their business really achieving that? And it's got to be more than just turning off the lights. And especially if you're a fashion company, it's really about the materiality of the fibers that you're using, and that what is the story both in terms of the impact you're having on land, but also communities and livelihoods and people. And so we want to really support the producing community to confidently tell that story, and brands to have the data behind which to tell that story. And I think this will be beneficial both for the consumers that are increasingly motivated to know that the brands that they're buying with are responsible and doing their part, not just doing their part, but really being transformative and helping us really meet the climate and ecological emergency. And so what we're trying to think about in this project is how do we take that scientific data and turn it into little nuggets of information that really help both the supply chain, but also the consumer understand the value of this, this product. And I think wool and sheep play such an important part in the ecological ecosystem that they're a really wonderful animal to kind of tell that environmental benefit story, both for people and planet. Next. So the farm that we're working with is a 90-hectare farm in Buckinghamshire, and it is a mixed arable farm. So Rosedale, who owns the farm, her family have farmed it for almost 60 years, and about 3 or 4 years ago she took over the farm from her father, and they've always had a strong sustainability ethos in what they're doing. So the farm has been organic previously, but as I'm going to show you, Rose is going sort of taking this to the next stage in its journey. And then importantly, this farm does have the River Tame flowing through it. So Rose sees, you know, a farm having a river, and in fact this stretch of Tame is part of the most polluted of the Thames. So she sees a real responsibility as a landholder that's got land with that river, the responsibility she has to ensure kind of what she can do to protect water quality. Next. And so as I mentioned, so Rose is actually part of these different organizations, which a number of you are probably aware of, but the Soil Association, obviously the River Tame Conservation Trust, which is the conservation trust that's kind of caring for that River Tame, and then Pasture for Life, which is, I think now has probably almost 700 members, but is community of farmers in the supply chain really committed to 100% pasture fed livestock. So Rose is really interested in managing her stock so that she can ensure that all those animals, and she's also got longhorns, are completely fed from the pasture on her land. And so we've had the opportunity to work with Rose now for 2 years, really helping support and help her realize her vision for producing sustainable products off her farm. And what Rose is really interested in is creating an economically viable template, you know, a blueprint to really demonstrate that following sustainable practice is going to be good resilience for her farm. And so she's thinking about the diversification of revenue and income streams that she has on the farm. And so for her, like thinking about the wool fiber is a really important opportunity around this. You know, if she was only, because she's got lower stocking levels, so if she had only just the meat income, that wouldn't really be sufficient. And so I think she's really interested in ensuring, like, one, these beautiful fleeces have value and are understood to have that value. So so where we're working with her is to understand what those markets for that fleece could be. But she also wanted this to all be underpinned by science. So really have an understanding of where her starting point is. And then as she undertakes sustainable farming practices, how, you know, to really be able to tell a story of improvement over time. Next. And so this is where, you know, core, and we'll kind of whip through these, but this is like some core work that we've been doing. So we've really worked with Rose to baseline the state of nature and carbon on her farm. And, you know, I know this is a really hot topic. You know, I think there's a lot of conversation within the farming community about how do we measure carbon in the soils, in the vegetation, but increasingly there's interest around nature. And I would say, and this would be interesting when we come to the Q&A, I feel like at the moment, because there is a carbon market, it has formed already a little bit around carbon. This seems to be like the quicker or earlier wins. But I think for the farming community, the real opportunity is thinking about biodiversity in nature and the kind of really important ecosystem services that come from the management of the land. And I think the more that we can collect that data and how that stories and evidence the really good practice, the more beneficial it will be in bringing more increased value to that. That's what we've been kind of trying to bring together, these two things, both the nature and the carbon performance. So we're hoping that the tools that I'm going to show you both help the farmer with their decision making, but also part of the work that we've been doing is finding out what do brands want from this information. What is it that they're looking for? So when a brand says, oh, we're like nature positive, well, what's the stats that need to be underpinned by that? And increasingly, and some of you on this call may be aware, but there's this framework developing called science-based targets for nature. And that's developing the kind of global methodologies for nature. And so just like we're seeing brands like, for example, you know, big fashion brand who sets science-based targets for carbon reduction, you're also going to see some of these fashion brands increasingly setting science-based targets for nature. So if I'm sitting in Caring and I've to that, then what does that mean I need to ask of my producers? What data am I going to be asking from them? And so this is a really lively conversation that's happening right now. Next. And so this is just to give you a flavor of all the different data sets that we have collected from Manor Farm and get plugged into our tool. So there's all the carbon information, there's all the nature, there's the different types of habitat and the condition of those habitats. There's the species, you know, as I highlighted, that's around key indicator species. And then there's lots around soil health, which is obviously really critical, both in field and lab tests. And then what we're trying to capture is what are the existing sustainable practices and schemes that the farmer is a part of, and what opportunities they might have to participate in. So the idea is once you've got this baseline, you can then, with consultation with the farmer and understanding where they're trying to get to, also support them in then identifying both funding opportunities and ways for improving the management of their land. And then this is just to give you a sense, some of you who might have been involved in understanding some of this, but you know, when you're working with nature, you've got to work with the seasons of nature to collect this data. So this was just to show that sometimes people want things really quick, but what we really learned, and Bex, who leads our biodiversity work, has been working in this space for 20 years. And it's just, yeah, there needs to be a little bit of patience to collect the data. And then you've got to collect certain data every year. But I think it's really interesting, like Rose, our farmer, she finds it really empowering to understand, you know, what's happening on her land. And this is kind of how we went through the year collecting the data. Next. And then this is just some illustrations of us out in the field, and in the middle one, it's us collecting the cores that then we sent off to the labs to measure the soil organic carbon and other kind of standard soil tests. And then in the top left is the bird survey work that we did to understand, because Rose does have some key kind of priority species that use her lands for farming. I mean, the birds don't use it for farming, but they use it for their habitat. Next. And then Ella, if you could just quickly go through these ones. So just kind of follow through these. I just wanted to show you, like, basically there's these different outputs that come through here. So if you could go next. So this is on the kind of different habitats. This is the kind of condition of the habitats using, like the DEFRA metrics for different habitat conditions. So this enables Rose to see kind of opportunities for improvement in her habitat over time. Next. And then this is oftentimes what's really important and interesting. Obviously, this is the carbon emissions, and as everybody I think on this call is going to be aware, is the, you know, when you have livestock, the enteric emissions and the methane associated with that livestock is significant. And that's why I think it's also, if you only distill this to a carbon story, and I think that, you know, as we know in the West, there can be in the kind of general population, this like, oh, kind of livestock is bad, it produces this methane. But I think you've got to bring in this more holistic story. So I hope, like, what comes from my presentation as I showcase you these other elements is really about the nature impact. And I think the more that we can tell that story of the role that livestock has and sheep have, the better it's going to be, and especially for the brands that are trying to look at not just reducing their carbon emissions, but being kind of nature positive in how they're impacting the land. And then this is the soil health, you know, and for Rose, this was really helpful just to see, you know, like, and we did this for all the different parcels of her land, you know, and we used the regenerative organic certification standards for collecting this data. So now she's got a really good map of what her soil health is across the land, and now can be working towards increasing and improving. And she's hoping as she develops her moving into more permanent pastures over time, she will see her soil health improve. Next. And then this is kind of going more towards what the kind of nature outputs of our tool are. So what space for nature means is it is the land that's unproductive. So this is land that's not farmed, it's like completely left in margins. So this might be a small area of woodland, it would be your hedgerows, it would be kind of trees that are populated through, it could be an area of wetlands or ponds. So this is like area that is not farmed. So there's also a statistic that we have that's around land sharing, which is kind of a score that brings in, the environmental schemes that you have across the land. And I think what we hear lots about is talking about land sharing and land sparing, and we need a combination of both these, and kind of doing this analysis on a farmland kind of helps. So for example, Rose could set herself a target that over the next 10 years she'd like to increase her space for nature to like 3-5%, let's say, and then we would work with her to find what areas of her farmland might be most appropriate to dedicate to a space for nature. And then there's this kind of stat around the plant species per hectares in the grassland. And again, like as she tries to increase the richness of the grasses and the botanical fauna in her land, now she's got a baseline, so she can work with us to help us think about kind of what might be the opportunities for improvement. And then this is the mean soil organic carbon, but there was a real variation across her different parcels of land. So some of her parcels of land that were more like floodplain, they were closer to 8%. Next. And then this is some of the kind of key species. So, obviously the earthworm count, and so in fact, Rose's soil, had some more conventional practices on it before she took over it. So in fact, that earthworm count is one would want to work to increase it. So again, by bringing back livestock, so they hadn't had livestock on the farm for almost 30 years. So by bringing back livestock and bringing more pasture in, the hope is that those earthworm counts will improve. Now, there's also stats, I can't think off the top of my head, but around, I think 39 is above average for farmland birds species. But again, she'd want to make sure that she continues to retain those habitats. And in fact, Rose is part of, as I mentioned, the River Tame Conservation Trust, which is taking a more landscape approach. And so that's an opportunity to be working with her neighbours to ensure that, like, she's got lapwings on her farm that nest, but the lapwings use feeding grounds on the neighbouring farm. So obviously it's going to be important for her to have good relationships, and be aligned with her neighbour farmer to ensure that the lapwing habitat is there. And then the wild bee and bumblebee species, she had 6 different varieties or species. And again, like, we're going to be advising Rose about increasing her space for pollinators on her land, to actually see if she can get those numbers up, because in fact, those are a bit lower than one might want for pollinators. Next. So hopefully right away you can see that there's some kind of immediate recommendations, but also there's some really nice things that we will have to tell a brand about the different types of wildlife that are on her land, that if they wanted to tell a story about the kind of the habit, the nature from this farm and what this farm is doing, there's some clear information. And then the other great thing is Rose has got 6 kilometers of hedgerows. And many of these hedgerows are well established, but she's also been building out at least 2 new rows of hedgerows, and she's also planted black poplar trees, which are a rare species in Buckinghamshire. So she's trying to kind of cultivate native species on her land. Next. And so Ella, if you just whip through this, so as you can see, and you can just keep going, Ella, on these ones. But what I wanted to show you is, like, one, we did all this analysis, but actually all of this data comes through into a tool that hopefully makes it really visual. And this tool not only is kind of been designed so that Rose gets key information, but when she's working with partners like the Wildlife Trust, or if she was working with the brand, and this is what we're doing right now, is having consultations with brands to find out, well, what information would they want? Because they don't probably want to look, they just want like the headlines, like maybe some of those key stats, and they want to know, like in a traffic light symbol, is this good, bad, or ugly kind of thing. So we want to be able to communicate that stat, because you might be a brand that's working with 50 farmers, and you might want to have an understanding of what's going on across your different 50 producing farmers. Next. So where we are in the project, so as you can see, we've done quite a lot of work, and we have a really good understanding both on the state of nature and carbon on Rose's farm. So now we've got some really, and then Rose has got all the certifications behind it. So now we've got a really good science story about what's happening onto the farm. And so Ella and I just 2 weeks ago went, and so now we're looking at the fleeces. There's about 100 Gotland. She's got 100 breeding ewes of Gotland on her farm. So now we're looking at, you know, where might be possible to process these fleeces. And also there's the British Gotland Society. So there's about 6,000 Gotlands in the UK. So, you know, obviously we're really interested to see, could we work with other Gotland herds and which ones are kind of located within a reasonable geography that we could then consolidate and work with these, to process and see if we could develop markets for this Gotland wool. And so the next stage has been one to learn about the processing, and that's why Ellen and I originally reached out and had a conversation, given everything that this project is doing in North Wales. But we went to go to the Bristol weaving mill, which some of you might be aware of, which is an enterprise that really helps with product design. So now we're working hopefully together to, you know, have some support from them in thinking about how we could take this wool to the next stage. And then we've also been having conversation with the wool keepers who are based down, I know Tom is down in Somerset, I think, you know, and has a lot of experience of grading fleeces and working with brands to source and work with their producers. So this feels like really valuable to build in that expertise of how we can take this fleece and make it into a stage that it can be processed and spun. And then also I've been having conversations with the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, you know, like, you know, given the work that I've been doing in fashion at large, is how to educate and expose up and coming designers to the potential that these materials have in their collection and how they can use them, and the issues that can come about that. So someone like Priya, when I came into the office with the Gotland fleece, she, even though she's worked with wool, she'd never actually seen a fleece. And so she's like, whoa, what is that? You know, she didn't know what the, you know, the raw product looked like. And I think that's really important for designers to understand the work that goes on into producing that fleece, and then all the steps that then that transport it into the garments that they are designing. And then Ella, do we have a next one? Oh yeah, that was my last slide. But and I think it's with the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, and then we're members of Textile Exchange, which some of you on this call might be also members of, which you know, is doing a lot of work thinking around animal fibers and the sustainability story of these fibers. And so just trying to join the dots up from, you know, all the way to the farm to the store, and hopefully like being able to do something really interesting that showcases the potential of, you know, rare breeds like the Gotlands. So I think I'll stop there and hope that we can open up to some questions and discussion.
Fantastic, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat, or if you just want to unmute yourself and go for it.
And love if there's anybody on this call who has suggestions or experience, you know, around working, you know, for us about how to work with this fleece, you know, Ella and I would really welcome.
We have a question from Johnny. Can you see the chat?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Johnny.
Oh, it's not a question.
And does anybody have any comments of what they think about the you know, this kind of approach, this science, and I don't know if anybody on the call is farming or higher up in the supply chain has any thoughts about like this data collection and how we make it manageable for farmers, and how do we make it compelling to consumers?
I think it's really interesting from our end of the project, because there's a few scoping studies going on to do around carbon and carbon offsetting. So I know there's a lot of our cluster that would be interesting in that maybe aren't in this particular call, but it could be interesting to put you in touch with them. And
yes, in fact, that's what Ellen was saying when we chatted a few months ago about these scoping studies. And in fact, one of the projects that Pilio is leading on at the moment is a DEFRA test and trial consultation, which is looking at landscape recovery. So we've been consulting with 50 farmers, and then lots of what we call intermediaries like wildlife trusts, environment agencies, and then potential investors. And in fact, what we're looking at is like how, as these new markets for carbon and then for nature develop, how do we, what are the incentives for these investors to finance this carbon or nature activity on the land? And what we call it is insetting. So carbon offsetting is when you do things outside of your supply chain, you know, outside of your value chain. You might you know, make payments to do a woodland, for example. But what I think is really exciting is to think about insetting, and that's great that you've brought it up, because that's, I would say, is very much part of what Pilio is working towards, is developing an insetting model. So in fact, I'm doing a project at the moment in sustainable cotton, which again would be this idea. So you could imagine a fashion brand who set itself a target to reduce its emissions or improve nature, and they will have a willingness to pay to see that happen. And then instead of them just randomly, like for example, Kering has supported projects in the Amazon rainforest, which is really important to do. But you might say, and I could say for Kering, maybe if they're sourcing leather and leather is driving deforestation in Amazon, yes, that's a really good offset project. But you can also see, well, Kering is using wool, they're using cotton, so they could do insetting and work to offset carbon or improve nature with the producing farmers of all those different commodities, and they will have a willingness to pay to run those projects. And we're doing a project right now in cotton that would do exactly that. And I'd love to do something like an example of like that in wool. So I could see, once we've kind of showcased with the rose example, because I do think people need to see stuff tangible, especially when it's like quite theoretical. I think to have a really working example. So hopefully like next year I can come back and we'll have like the Gotland product. But then I think if we could take it to an insetting model, that could be really exciting. You could imagine, like, let's say John Lewis doing an, you know, who do a lot of purchasing of British wool. But what happens if they did a carbon or nature project within their wool supply chain, and what would that look like? That would be super exciting.
Sounds amazing. So the insetting, the carbon insetting that happens, it's similar to the offsetting, but happens during the kind of the creation of the product rather than to balance it out after the fact.
And I think that the nice thing about insetting is that it's a new concept. It's almost like an evolution of offsetting. So it uses the same methodologies, but instead of so oftentimes what happens with carbon offsetting, you go to a broker and they just source carbon credits for you in the market, and you might choose your project, whereas this is normally tailored right into your supply chain. So one of the challenges is sometimes brands don't know where they're sourcing from. So sometimes brands only know the country of origin of where they're getting their fiber. And this is saying actually it's valuable to know, try and build those relationships back into the supply chain. So I think this is what we're interested in, the work that we're doing in wool here in the UK, is that we've got that traceability. So we can, with confidence, especially if we could develop something with other Gotland livestock, we would know those farmers, we would have this baseline data. Hopefully we would work with those farmers to have those certain certifications so that they can really evidence their good practice, and then you could really design the insetting project more easily. So you could imagine like a hedgerows, for example, a hedgerows project. So you could imagine like saying, I want to inset and have 100 kilometers of hedgerows, and I have a willingness to pay of this. And then the brand would have that story, they would have the story that they've helped activate and support their farmers plant 100 kilometers of hedgerows.
Amazing. It's really interesting to see all the different elements that isn't just specific to the wool or to the product, like you were saying about the nature as a whole around the product. Amazing. We've got a question from Nick in the chat.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that Ella and I are seeing is that it's really hard if you're trying to do something innovative in the supply chain, that you don't have that purchasing power or the volumes to make it worthwhile. So the established players, they can't change their processes, so at the moment I think what we've got is like some great entrepreneurship, but we're missing that middle bit and then you've got some appetite from the big brands, they want to see this all happen, but they're not really yet. Some of them are doing some nice pilot projects and nice, but there's this gap of how do we scale it. And I think this is what I'm seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing this with some of the other curated talks that you've had, is how do we rebuild these supply chains up to make it possible, to do this. Like, we know to process our Gotland fleeces is going to be hard. There's not at the moment a big volume, but you're not going to have the big volume overnight. You've got to demonstrate. So you've got to have the ladder up. So I think this is one challenge. So I think like the Mentamon project has been really valuable in kind of activating and building this ecosystem and this conversation up. Yeah, so I think exactly as you're saying, Nick, like small scale processing capabilities would be really valuable, I think. And I think this is where like the Innovate UK stuff comes in. This is where the conversations I'm in with Innovate UK, and we've been lucky recipients of Innovate UK, but when they're looking at what can they do to support business, it's not only the innovation, but it's the policy, and the infrastructure question, and how does government support that investment and do maybe joint ventures. Oh yeah, I've done that too, Nick, traveling and being on webinars. And then I think another challenge of this is this traceability story. It's just really hard right now, the way the industry is structured, to really be confident, and come back to the farm level. And especially in fashion, it's just like, if you ever look at, and even for wool, you know, it will go like internationally, you know, it gets the fleece in the UK, then it gets processed on mainland Europe, then it might go off to China, then it comes back to Turkey for finishing, and then it comes back into the UK. So it's really convoluted. Yeah, it's not a simple supply chain.
Brilliant. Do you have any more questions from anyone?
Oh yes. So we haven't had it officially graded yet from British wool, but we are working with hopefully wool keepers are going to help us grade the wool. And
sorry, I
can Scotland.
Sorry, I didn't know how to unmute myself. Sorry. Sorry, did you say you can just take it to the depot? Has she done that, her local depot, to get it graded?
No, I haven't.
It's not complicated. She could just take it and look up her local depot and take it in and have the wool graded. There's also a grading list I can send to you, which has every British wool sheep in the UK, and it's micron and what it would be, but what she needs to do is get her own wool graded, because there's lots of environmental impacts and things that affect the grading of the sheep. And until you've done that, and until you've kind of seen where you are in the grand scheme of fibres and what can be processed, then it's hard to kind of like accumulate everything, because a lot of the data that you're getting is obviously hugely valuable from a natural and nature and farming perspective, but there's still a huge amount of data that needs to be collected from an actual fleece, and in order to be able to accommodate and facilitate processing going forward. So that's a key part of the supply chain. So until there's adequate grading across, again, against fleece, because at the moment British wool only grade to grade as opposed to breed, but if there's enough of a breed, then they'll start to grade to a breed. So I think that's my understanding of where they're at the moment, but I think there's quite a few holes between where you're at and where you need to be in terms of scalability for a bigger company to take it on, because there needs to be, as you know, there needs to be consistency. And unless you've got the data to do with the actual technical fabric, then you won't be able to get the consistency. Your data is hugely valuable in another sector of sustainability, which is adds an extra value to the things. But for example, Scotland, I think it's a lowland sheep. I'm not big on farming. I'm not a farmer. I'm more about fibres. So it wouldn't be as applicable, I believe, in what, I don't know what the numbers are in Wales, but there's a lot of hill farmers. So you know, it's really important, you know, when you're looking at localization, to think about the actual breed and suitability of the breed to exactly where you are. So that's sorry, that was my input in terms of, you were asking about the fibre. This is a really quick way of getting it done, and then I think that it's super interesting, your take on everything. So thank you for that, and I'll back off now with my questions if you haven't got any other information.
Thanks, Jackie. No, that's good, and we do have what is it, the I forget we have the book, you know, that has all the different grades of British, or of all different wool fibres, global, and yeah, and it is, Scotland's our lowland, and as you're correct, compared to where this network is based in North Wales, where there's more Highland sheep, and then we do know we've started to measure the microns, but that's why we want, as you said, we need to get the experts in to really kind of review the quality of the wool, and then also advise our farmer to ensure the quality of their fleece, like what's the, and this is what's interesting, given that Rose is 100% pasture fed, she's not giving any feed inputs like additional nutrition to her sheep. So the quality of the fleece is going to be as good as her land. So it's the better care that she can have of the land. And I think this is going to be really interesting if you're thinking about these sustainability practices, because then you need consistency across stocks, you know, across herds, if you're going to be aggregating them. So again, you know, they're going to be on these different diets, you know, so we'd really need to like understand these other Gotland livestock herds and kind of what their fleece quality and etc. is, and probably need to be relatively local to Buckinghamshire, so that they're in similar climates, microclimates. But thank you, Jackie. Thank you.
Do we have any more
Great.
questions?
Thank you.
No? Well, thank you very much, Cathrine. It was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. So we do have some more workshops and visits coming up. So if you're not signed up to our World Cluster already, the link is at the top of the chat for you to sign up there. And you can also keep an eye on our socials. I've also put a link for our feedback form. So if you can fill that out, that would be a lot of help for us. And we always want to hear from you if you've got any suggestions for future workshops or visits that you'd like to do. So you can either put it in the form or email us at gwlan@mentormon.com. So thank you all again, and thank you Cathrine and Ella, and hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.